No tractor talk in bed. Got it.
Welcome to Barnyard Language. We are Katie and Arlene, an Iowa sheep farmer and an Ontario dairy farmer, with 6 kids, 2 husbands, and a whole lot of chaos between us. So kick off your boots, reheat your coffee, and join us for some Barnyard Language. Honest talk about running farms and raising families.
In case your kids haven't already learned all the swears from being in the barn, it might be a good idea to put on some headphones or turn down the volume. While many of our guests are professionals, they aren't your professionals. If you need personalized advice, consult your people. Welcome back to another episode of Barnyard Language. Thank you for joining us again on the podcast today. It is our special Valentine's Day episode, and our husbands are disappointed they didn't get invited back, but we have another.
I don't think they're disappointed
instead.
at all.
You don't think there's? I don't know.
No.
My husband was curious about whether he was coming back. Was Jim didn't want to come back again?
Jim looked fairly joyful at not being involved again, although I know he and Hugh are in fairly close messenger contact these days. I think,
they could probably
good,
just call
so
each other if they want to talk.
Yeah.
So what is going on in Iowa these days?
Packing, Arlene. That's it.
Yeah. You're getting, how many bags are you bringing? Are you just trying to get everything into one very small bag?
You know I'm moving, right?
Yeah, you got a passport and now you're moving to Canada? That's not quite the same as a
I'm
path
out of
to
here. I'm going to
citizenship.
Arlene's. Never said anything about coming back. I tend to be a horrible overpacker, so I'm trying to overpack so that then I can unpack like 2/3 of it and pack like a normal human. This is my approach this time, so we'll see how it goes.
Yes, and we have put out a call to any Eastern Ontario listeners. If you want to come hang out with us, you have to join the Facebook group first because that's where the details are going to be. But if you live near me, which is, Eastern Ontario, then you can come and see Katie because she's going to leave Iowa. And
you can come and see Arlene too, because it's not like
you can come see me too. Yeah. I still live there. How is everyone feeling? Do the kids know you're leaving?
I think so.
It's still a while off. I usually don't tell my people until like the day before.
Yeah. I hadn't told him yet. I think Daddy did. The boy child, once he heard that there weren't any tractors and I wasn't going to the beach, he doesn't care.
Yeah, not interested in that.
The girl child, I think she was watching TV when he told her, so I don't think she even heard him. But, no, I don't think they care. I heard your kids are warming up some Iowa jokes, though, so that's good.
Yes, yeah.
I'm impressed they didn't know any Iowa jokes, but whatever.
I was telling Katie the other day, my now 15-year-old just turned 15 this week. That was one of our updates in our house. We had another age upgrade, and he's like inches taller than me now. They went on a boys' weekend to Syracuse in New York State, which isn't all that far from us. And so my husband took the 3 boys, and they spent the weekend down there just to have a change of scenery, do something different. So I asked my 15-year-old, what are you looking forward to doing when you're in the States? And he's like, healthcare jokes. And I said, that's not very nice. And he said, well, that's freedom for you. So he's already ready to start.
I just like that your 15-year-old is making healthcare jokes.
Yeah, that he knows about the difference in our healthcare systems. I'm not sure how much he actually knows, but he knows that it's a good way to make fun of people, apparently. I don't know what he's learning on YouTube, let's be honest. But hopefully the jokes are good. Katie can vet them.
Yeah. So what's happening on your farm, Arlene?
Well, we're getting a fun mix of weather. It went from minus 35 to plus 5 today, so good pneumonia weather for animals. But I should knock on wood or something. So far, things are okay. It was a really weird swing. And a few things froze, but then, immediately thawed out. And now it's weird and warm and, just strange weather stuff going on. Like I said, the boys went away for the weekend. So it was just my daughter and I here in the house for a couple of days, which was kind of nice, very quiet. And I actually set up a little podcasting, permanent setup. So we are not professionals, as any listeners will know. But until this week, I had been taking everything from its various hiding places around the house and bringing it to our toy room, and that's where I would record, and then I have to pack everything up and put it all away again. So I actually cleared out a tiny corner in a cabinet that still holds our dress-up clothes, but now has a little space for me. So I have my own little laptop, and my microphone and everything is set up all the time, so I don't have to unpack and repack everything every time, which has been a huge bonus. And then typically my microphone and my headphones work when I log in every time, which didn't always work before. So that is a huge bonus as well. Especially because this was a busy week. We had 4 interviews in 1 week, Katie.
It was a lot.
It's a lot.
It's a lot.
Yeah, we are actually pre-recording a bit, so that'll hopefully swing us through some of the busier farm times, because we've been so efficient through the winter, and means Katie can take a break and come to Ontario too. So next week's
to
update,
record together in person.
Yeah, we might record together in person for the first time and see each other in person for the second time ever. Can you tell we're excited?
Yeah. Yay.
Yeah. Yay. Anyway, we are excited to share this Valentine's Day episode with you, and I think that you're all going to enjoy what our guest has to say. So here she is.
And I'm going to interrupt you right here, Arlene. If any of our listeners thought that I was not that excited today, it's because there is a pot roast cooking in my kitchen, and it is 2 hours past lunchtime, and I am very, very hungry, and it smells incredible. And I've been having an increasingly difficult time sitting here smelling this damn pot roast for supper that I can't eat now anyway. But,
oh, sure you can. Go hack a slice off.
No, like it's not finished cooking. It's ew, yuck. But it smells really, really good. So
okay, well, you can't smell the pot roast.
I just wanted people to know that it's not Arlene, it's me and my pot roast. That is
your energy equates to what's in the slow cooker. Yeah. All right, here she is. Today we are talking to Carrie Pollard, who's joining us from Ontario for a very special Valentine's Day episode. So Carrie, we start each of our interviews with the same question, and as you probably know, this is a way to introduce yourself to our listeners, and we always ask, what are you growing? So for our farming guests, that's crops and livestock, but also kids and businesses and lots of other things. So Carrie, what are you growing?
Well, we're grain farmers here. Our farm is north of Guelph, Ontario. And so we grow soybeans, wheat, and corn primarily. Obviously, all of our fields are covered in snow and freezing rain specifically today, but that's the crops that we primarily grow. We're also growing 5 children, and ranging in age from 1 to 14. So quite a space there. And we have a Basset Hound puppy as well. So basically, most of my days are filled with cleaning up a lot of poo and cleaning up a lot of messes. Like that would be probably 60%, I would say, at least of my day is doing that kind of work. And I'm also helping to grow 2 different businesses. I've started my own private practice, Flourish with Compassion Psychotherapy, and I've helped co-found the National Farmer Mental Health Alliance. So we're trying to grow those as well.
That is a lot of different things all at the same time.
Yes.
So, Carrie, how did you get into psychotherapy, and what training do you have specifically for working with couples?
They've written a lot of books on couples work and family work. They have 40 plus years of experience researching couple work, but also working with, I think they said something like 3,000 couples. And so I really value their insights, and all of the techniques and skills that they encourage people to develop are really simple, really strengths focused. And it just really resonates with my own personal experience, even just in my relationship with my husband. And so you'll find today, whenever I'm asked a question, I might be doing like a little plug for the Gottmans, just because they are near and dear to my heart. And I really value their insight in couples work. But I will say, with the things that I do answer today, all of that is really based on my personal experience and of course some of my training, but everybody's relationship experience is unique. So it's not meant to be therapeutic advice by any means. And I love how you start your podcast and just encourage people to consult their people. So if anyone is listening today and they do really feel like they need some support in their relationships, whether it be with their spouse or their family members, I encourage you to go to the National Farmer Mental Health Alliance resources page. We list all the kinds of resources that can be available both in Canada and the US that are available for farmers specifically.
So we already had your co-founder of the National Farmers Mental Health Alliance on at a previous episode. But for people who haven't caught up on every single episode, can you give like a brief outline of what that is and why the two of you started it?
Yeah, absolutely. So Loren and I connected maybe about a year and a half ago. We had been connecting with a similar farm organization to offer some workshops, and we just connected right away. We recognized the gap and the need for providing basically mental health supports for farmers specifically. And what we noticed the gap is specifically having therapists that have that farm experience. So have lived the farm life, either are farmers or from farm families or currently farming, in my case, a farming partner. And so it's having that kind of unique experience, and also working as a therapist really does help kind of understand the unique stressors and pressures that farm families undergo. And so we collaborated together to create the National Farmer Mental Health Alliance. And what we do is we do offer resources and supports to agricultural organizations like workshops, as well as articles. And we also are providing something called agriculture informed therapy to other therapists and life coaches so that they can also come into their work with their farm clients with a more informed perspective.
Yeah, I think that's really important work, and I'm excited about the connections that the two of you are making, and I hope that only expands from here. So the main reason we had you on today is because we thought Valentine's Day last year we had our own spouses on, and not saying that we need therapy necessarily, but we thought that this was a good way to also celebrate Valentine's Day and acknowledge that farm couples do have unique challenges if you're in a partnership of some kind. And so I feel like one of the beginning questions for a lot of people is, one, how do you get your partner to go to therapy if you think you need to go to therapy? And how do you know if you need therapy? So those are kind of different questions, but the kind of the basis of when should you go and how do you get someone else to agree to go?
Well, and I think they are so interconnected, right? And so I think in terms of who can benefit, I think anybody can. Like in terms of our relationships, they're hard work. I think any relationship is hard work, but farming relationships, there can be additional stresses of having long hours, a lot of pressure, a lot of demands, and a lot of time your partner is also your coworker. And so having such significant overlap, it can just be really helpful to make time and space to kind of work through personal issues, but even sometimes, especially like when you're considering succession planning and other challenges, it can be farm related as well, where you just kind of really need some support to resolve any kind of conflict or confusion. I often think of it like you just want to, sometimes you can just go into it just as like a tune-up. Maybe everything's kind of flowing really well, but it would just be nice to improve these small little things. And so just like I know this time of the year, we're basically maintaining all of our machinery so that it's ready to go for planting season. And so it's not that there's any specific problem, but we're trying to do some troubleshooting to make sure that we don't discover a problem right in the middle of planting. And so I think it's similar with relationships. Sometimes just having a therapist that you feel comfortable with to go to on a semi-regular basis can just be a way to keep making sure that your relationship is flowing well. In terms of getting your partner to therapy, that is a tricky one. I mean, we don't have control over anyone but ourselves. And so it's not something you can certainly force anyone into. That being said, I'm a big fan of strategic communication. I call it strategic in the sense that manipulative sounds really bad. So strategic is just meant by getting a buy-in, right? And so I think a lot of times when I find people when they approach their partner, it's like, you're doing this, so you need to go get help over this. And instead, I think if you approach it as a we issue, we're having problems communicating right now. We're having troubles connecting. We're not connecting on a physical level. And I miss that, just going into it with a we problem and kind of joining with that challenge can really reduce defensiveness with your partner and might increase the likelihood that they'll want to go. And then I think it's never harmful to kind of sweeten the deal afterwards. If you have kids like me, it would be kind of like, let's go for dinner afterwards. Like, let's have some uninterrupted time away from the kids. And then let's do something we could enjoy afterwards.
I like that too. The making it a little less onerous to go to therapy. So if someone has never gone to couples therapy, what can they expect? And it seems like that fear of, for those of us who've gone to therapy before, like couples therapy is still a stressful idea, but I'm sure for folks who've never gone, it's got to be a real, not super appealing thing to do with your life, or your very small amount of time away from the farm.
Exactly. And I think that's important to recognize. Like, it's just any kind of, even doing individual therapy can be really difficult. It's one of those things where you go into it hoping to feel better, but sometimes initially, as you're kind of opening up really painful things, either individually or as a couple, it's really hard. And so to dedicate really limited time to that can be really challenging, because after a really difficult couple session, two people might feel really vulnerable and raw and like maybe even more agitated, and then have to head back to work. And so I think part of the way of kind of preparing for it is just recognizing that creating change is hard. And that's kind of what therapy is. Therapy is kind of a blend of having a safe place to talk through things, but it's also a space to create change, because you're often going because there's something that you want to be a little bit different, or maybe a lot different. And so I think just kind of going into it knowing that it's probably going to be hard work, but farming is hard. And it's worth it. So, I think that it's just recognizing that to create the kind of change that you desire, it can really be helpful. In terms of like what to expect from a practical standpoint, every therapist kind of work a little bit different. Like when I work with couples, I generally meet with them together, because I just want to make sure that I don't seem biased towards one person over the other. And so my first meeting will be meeting with two people together. We'll often just kind of get a general sense of what the problem story is, like what's going on, what's not working right from each other's perspective. And then we'll move into what is it that you're looking for, right? So we kind of move more to a story of hope and kind of get a sense of what each person would like more of. And what you can expect too is just kind of having uninterrupted time. And I think that's so rare. Like my husband and I can never complete a conversation without an interruption. He might get a text, excuse me, for seed sale, or he, one of the kids for sure interrupt us, undoubtedly, probably repeatedly. So to get that uninterrupted time to have like full, complete sentences, a full conversation. And then where couples therapy, I think like when I saw it on TV, I remember seeing this one episode on this old TV show when I was a kid, and they both had these like rubber bats, and they were kind of like hitting each other as a way of like working through their anger with each other. And couples therapy isn't like that at all. I mean, it's the therapist isn't there to break up the fights. The therapist is really just there to kind of help you understand each other. And a lot of times what's happening is when we're communicating with our partners, we're not hearing what they're saying. We're just listening to respond rather than listening to understand. And so sometimes just having another person in that room with you to help interpret what's going on with each of you just really increases that understanding, which then can increase the connection. And I often think that's my role as a therapist, is like to really get people to hear each other.
It seems like, too, it's good to have that pressure to act like a grown-up when you're having those conversations, because if it's already really hard to get the time to have a conversation, and it's a conversation you don't want to be having, it can be really easy to justify letting yourself get distracted or letting yourself get interrupted or whatever else. And I would like to think that most people are going to fight a little bit fairer if there's a third party in the room,
At least for the first one or two sessions.
Yeah. Keeps you a little bit on your better behavior, hopefully.
Yeah.
So, Carrie, we polled our listeners and people who follow us on social media for some ideas for some questions. And the one that I feel like comes up all the time, no matter what kind of farmer you are or what your situation is that having that feeling that the farm always comes first. And I feel like especially once you have kids, that brings a lot of resentment and sometimes disappointment or hurt from whichever partner feels like they're the one being put on the back burner. And sometimes kids can exacerbate that, because then it's just one more thing to take care of, and your needs just end up at the bottom of the pile again. So how do farm couples specifically cope with that idea that feeling like the farm always comes first, and working our way through that as couples.
Yeah, I think that is a really fair question, and something that I definitely hear comes up a lot, and definitely something that I can say I can even relate to as well in my own relationship, because it is really challenging. And I think that, what I find works for me is just learning to be flexible with expectations. Like, obviously, for us, the planting seasons or the busy seasons are planting and harvest. So our contact with each other is really minimal, and we're each kind of working independently towards kind of the same goal, which is to keep the farm and the family stuff going. And so I think being flexible with those expectations based on the season. But I think also it's, a lot of times I think we expect it to be like a relationship. In order for it to be maintained and to feel okay with it, it needs big things. Because like you said, when you don't have a lot of time even for yourself, just to even have a shower some days, it can be really difficult to pour anything else out into your relationship. And I think the biggest thing that I take in this, and here I am already going to the Gottman's research, is that they find that small gestures make a huge difference. Like, a lot of times we think it's like this big thing that we have to go on dates. I can't remember. I think it's been over a year since my husband and I have been on a date, an actual date where we went out and I wasn't preparing the meal or he wasn't. So, those kind of things are wonderful if you get the opportunity to do that. But if your lifestyle or your farm doesn't allow that, there can be other ways. And so I think small gestures can be like basically paying attention to the other person. It can be sending a quick text or a funny meme, or it can be, a lot of times during busy seasons, we have conversations on the phone. I think it breaks up the monotony of his time in the fields, and it also helps me have like another adult human to talk to, since I have all small children mostly around me. And so I think a big part of this is just recognizing those small connections can make a huge difference. And not just like the verbal mental connection, but also like the physical connection. Having a quick hug and kiss before you go can be just this way of like, okay, yeah, we're parents, we're partners, we're working together potentially on the farm as well, but we're also romantic partners too. And so sometimes something that could take maybe 5 seconds, a quick hug goodbye, could be just that gentle reminder of like, hey, we're also married partners or committed life partners too. And so I think it's just recognizing that those small things can make a big difference, can help make each other feel appreciated and valued, and then I think can hopefully reduce any kind of resentment or disappointment.
So how do we not talk about business when we're in bed? Because I'll tell you something, it kills the romance to start, any romance that might be left at this point. The minute you start talking about planting or cattle in bed, it's gone. It's so how do you keep work conversations at work when you work at home with your family?
Yeah. I think that's a really good question. I have to say, like, initially my answer would be, you can't. I don't know. Like, I've seen couples, and we've tried it ourselves, to try to like put these like boundaries around conversations, but then inevitably one of us violates it and ends up bringing up something related to the farm. And I'd say the other thing too is around kids. Like, when we actually do go on a date, we're like, okay, we're not going to talk about kids. We're going to like talk about our adult stuff and be there. But the kids and the farm are both two really important things in our life. So it just naturally comes up when we're talking about things that matter. And so I think that when it comes to the bedroom, I agree with you. Like, I would really love to see that ability to kind of make the bed just for sleeping and sex only. Like, if you could just do just those two things, and I mean, no iPads, no phones, no TV, like if you can keep those two things just for the bed, I think that's a beautiful boundary, and I fully encourage people to do that. But I think otherwise, kind of having boundaries around the talk around the farm, I think it's good to be intentional when you're at home or when you're at the dinner table or when you're trying to do some non-farm activities, to just say, hey, let's be curious about each other. Let's be curious about what each person is doing outside of our farm and our family. And I think it's also important to be flexible, to allow the farm stuff to come up, because it's one of those things that if I were to say the two of you, don't think about a pink bunny for the next 1 minute, you're going to think about a pink bunny. In fact, probably the pink bunny popped into your head immediately, right? And so as soon as we start to try to be too rigid with our boundaries, we end up violating it right away. And then a lot of people just give up on it. So I think if you can kind of say to yourself, hey, let's be intentional around focusing on each other and being curious about each other, and allow ourselves to talk about the farm or the kids or anything else as it comes up, I think that'll be a lot easier to kind of maintain that. So I know right now, it's our sort of our off season, our equipment maintenance phase, but my husband, what he does as his kind of off farm interest, and you're going to laugh because I'm saying off farm, but what he likes to do is he likes to restore Massey tractors. So it's not like totally unfarm related. It's still farm related, let's be honest, but he's really passionate about that. He's passionate about that. Plus he restores some Honda dirt bikes. And so that's one of the beautiful things that he does. So we talk about the farm a little bit less this time of the year, and it gives us the opportunity to talk about other things because he's able to invest in other things about himself. And I think that's something that we have to be really mindful of. Like as a couple, as an individual in a couple, it's taking some time and space to have your own interests of things that you do that's separate from the farm. I mean, for example, this podcast that the two of you are doing is farming related, but it's also probably really meeting some kind of like personal values and needs, and gives you something else to get excited about and connect with other people and have great stories to share with your partners at a later point. So I think investing in yourself, being curious about your partner, and being flexible with those boundaries can make a really, really great difference. Except for the bed. If you can keep the bed sacred, that would be really nice.
No tractor talk in bed. Got it.
That being said, we don't. We violate that all the time.
So we had a bunch of more questions about communication, and I've kind of categorized them a little bit. So we had a couple that were about both kind of on the farm and in the house, how we communicate about the little stuff. And, you know, whether it's on the farm, trying not to make one or the other feel like an employee, or same thing in the house. If one person is kind of the lead when it comes to household activities, not making the other person feel like they're being nagged or delegated to, but also sharing the work, but communicating though, you know, the stuff that can end up being kind of nitpicky. What are some tricks for communicating those types of things with each other?
Well, I think that's a excellent question. I'm going to be honest. I even last night before, as I was preparing for the podcast, I sat down with my husband and it was like, hey, here's some of the questions. What do you think about the answers? And I was really excited that our answers actually weirdly aligned. I didn't expect that. But for him, his answer to this question would be, we're a team, go into it with a team mentality and make sure that you create systems that work. And then if you create systems that work, then you shouldn't be having a lot of problems. So you can tell he comes at it with a really wonderful managerial perspective. For me, I agree. You're a team. That's a huge part. And I think that when you're working with your partner or with your family, it's so much easier to speak without editing because these are like your people. They're kind of stuck with you. So you feel like you can just kind of say whatever comes into your head and let it come right out of your mouth. And it's even easier to do that when you're feeling stressed or overwhelmed or you haven't had very much sleep. And so we can all kind of get irritable and have a hard time choosing our words. But that being said, like I'm a huge advocate for editing as much as possible. I think it helps relationships be healthy. So when you think about addressing your partner, if it's a nitpicky thing or if it's like, in my case, because I would be the employee in a relationship where you have to talk down to someone in a way about something that's being done wrong, I think it's just really important to just be aware of your words. Think about how you would talk to your bank manager or how you'd speak to your one of your kids or maybe even the teacher of one of your kids, and just find a way to communicate it in a way that can be a little bit kinder, but give yourself grace when that doesn't happen, because you can always apologize and make repairs. But as much as possible, I think just being a little bit more careful with your words can make a huge difference. And I have to say, it was funny because when I was reading through these questions yesterday, I had received actually a text message. And I remember there was this whole series on social media of people posting their conversations with their partners in farming that they have over text, which were really, really funny. And so I could probably post this one, but my husband was asking me to order this electronic transfer pump. And I give him props for this, he actually added the word please, which to me makes a huge difference. And then he added a kissy face emoji. So it probably only took an extra 1 to 2 seconds to just soften that request. And what it did is it actually made me want to take a break from my work, order the pump, and then go back to my work. And I'm going to be a bit honest, like if he had asked in a more of an abrupt way, like get this pump for me, I probably wouldn't have done it right away. Like it really would have been on the list, but not at the top of the list. And so being mindful of our communication doesn't have to take a lot of work, and it can have a huge impact of wanting to work together on things.
Yeah, that's really true, because the way you get asked to do something or told to do something is, well, yeah, and whether you get asked or you get told, those are two.
That's a
very
huge
different
distinction,
things.
right?
Yeah, that is definitely. Yeah, and as a parent, we know that that's a distinction too, right? And sometimes you have to be told to do something, but most of the time we can be asked. Yeah,
it is. It feels better.
Yeah, what about situations when you ask for help because you genuinely need it or want it, and the response that you get back is that they're too busy or too tired, or like we said before, the farm comes first? How do you deal with that situation when you are putting yourself out there and asking for help, and the answer is no, or not right now?
Yeah, and I think that comes up a lot. And it's tough. Like I do really think there isn't a perfect answer for that. I think it's one of those things where I always use the word both and. Like I like the word and to recognize you can have multiple feelings at one time, and you can be really too tired and busy to want to help, and you can push yourself to help. And sometimes you might want to give your partner grace and let them let them off the hook, right? And so I think that, again, we have to recognize that we're in this together. We're a team. We're a team as in terms of how we're approaching our family. We're a team as in terms of how we're approaching our farm. And I think it's just really important to, as much as possible, be able to be there. Because I often find most people, no matter what side you are in the partnership of the farm, it's really hard to ask for help. We have a lot of strong people who are incredibly resilient. And so by the time most people are asking for help, you're really needing the help. Like you're probably at the breaking point. And so I think as much as possible for us to be able to say, hey, I can push it a little bit more. My husband always says you can push it 20% further, which isn't always a healthy thing, but it's sometimes when it comes to our relationships, if you could just kind of give yourself a little extra push, whether that be to help with cleaning up after dinner or bathing the kids, or maybe just going for a walk together because maybe you just need some time away from the house and to be able to be together. I think that investment is really important too, because I think that a lot of us have to remember that, as much as the farm is a priority, for most of us, and I forget what the statistic is, I think it's somewhere around 90% of farms are family run. And so the family is important too. And a lot of times there is no farm without the family. And so saving some of that energy to invest in your relationship is really critical. And in order to invest in your relationship, you also have to invest in yourself. Like it's that analogy that you always hear when you're on an airplane, that you have to kind of put the oxygen mask on yourself. I think a lot of times when our partners or ourselves say we're too tired and busy, it's because we've pushed ourselves beyond capacity and not left anything for ourselves. So I think if we can find space to care for ourselves, then it gives us a little bit more energy left to also care for our relationships.
Yeah. We had another listener ask about helping a spouse or partner who doesn't have a farm background to better understand stressful seasons or farming in general. And I know, that's a lot of your work with the Mental Health Alliance is helping therapists to understand. But in a partnership, I imagine that's a unique challenge, is trying to have someone else adapt to a lifestyle that they didn't grow up with. So do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, and I think that is so important. And I have to say that is definitely something that I can relate to. I mean, prior to meeting my husband, I grew up in a rural community. I grew up in Chatham, Ontario. So really small community. I did corn to tasseling. So it wasn't that I didn't grow up in a farming community, because I did very much grow up in that kind of rural experience. But my family are not farmers. So I didn't have that kind of experience growing up. And so, when I got married and became a part of my husband and his family, it was very eye-opening for me to see what that experience was like. And I have to say, what has been really helpful for me is having him prepare me. It's like, this is what I have on the agenda today, or this is what my week looks like, or this is what this month is going to look like. This is how busy it's going to be. And so if I know that I'm going to be doing most things by myself, whether it be navigating the childcare drop-off or anything on the home front, then that helps me be like, okay, I know this is happening. So I think preparation and communication about what to expect and what's going on can really, really make a big difference. And I think both partners can just continue to be curious about each other. Like, I think that the person with the non-farm job, it's really good for you to ask questions like, what's happening, what's going on right now on the farm, and vice versa. So I think if we're curious about each other and try to look for the best in our partner, it can be a lot easier to be patient, even during those really, really frustrated times. And I know that each year, like, we've had to learn how to be flexible. Like, I know the first few years I would bring out meals to the field and coffees and things like that. And that helped me feel connected and involved. But then the more kids that added up, right, it just got really, really, really stressful and overwhelming for me. So even though it was good for the kids and it was good for my husband, it was too overwhelming. So we learned how to flex again, and we figured out ways for him to be and for our family to be well fed, but for me not to be taking on that additional task of running all over the place, because our farms are quite spread out, sometimes hours apart. So I think a big part is just learning to be flexible and figuring out how you can support each other.
I know, Carrie, it's made a huge difference in our relationship to try to really be intentional about asking what the other one has going on, because it's so easy to get this whole list going in your head that you just sort of assume that it must be on some like familial brain length something that, you know, your partner will magically know what your priorities are. And it's really hard for anyone to interrupt their list of priorities to prioritize somebody else's priorities. So it turns out that it's a lot easier if you work on your list of priorities together before either of you gets too
I love that.
set in stone about it. Because especially on weekends, you know, one of us will say, but I had this, and this planned. I'm like, cool, you didn't mention any of that until Saturday lunchtime, so...
Exactly,
you know,
yeah.
You can't expect too much buy-in from the rest of us. How can we address when we can't share our burdens with our partner because we know that it won't be good for their mental health, and not in a martyrdom kind of way, but there are just times that a problem shared is not a problem halved, you know.
I agree. Yeah, I agree with you wholeheartedly. You want to think that your partner can be your everything, and that you can share things freely. But I agree with you. Sometimes part of loving someone is recognizing when sharing something with them would be too much. But at the same time, you don't want to be left alone and isolated in dealing with that either. And so I think that's why a big part of being healthy in a relationship is to be healthy as an individual, and to make sure that you have your people and your supports that are people that you can talk to. So if you can't share something with your partner, do you have a friend that you can talk to about it, or to have your own therapist to be able to kind of talk through and kind of get that needed support from, or a parent, or anyone else where there would be that kind of healthy relationship. So I think a lot of times we get these unhealthy messages of your partner should be your everything and you should be able to tell everyone everything. Well, sometimes sharing everything will make the relationship really unhealthy, and it could be really damaging. And so I think it is about making sure that you have your people, your space, your time to be able to talk about the things that are really important, but that your partner couldn't handle maybe at that particular time, or maybe ever. So yeah, I think I agree with you. Like a problem shared is a problem halved, but that doesn't mean that you always share it with just that one person. You might share it with other people, or maybe you journal about it. Like for me, I have a journal. I find it really accessible, so that if I'm overwhelmed by things, I can really break it down in my head and write it out, because maybe I wouldn't be able to like text a friend right away in that moment. So I think it's about figuring out what you need to kind of take care of you.
I think too, maybe especially with farmers, it seems like so many of us are people who like to fix things, that especially, if I have a problem that's mostly emotional or where there's a stress that really nothing is going to fix it except time, and there's really no control over the situation. Handing that to someone who deals with things entirely by fixing them is not going to be helpful. It's
Agreed.
just frustrating for everyone at that point. So,
Mm-hmm.
one of the other questions we had gotten is how we draw boundaries when a partner refuses to get or accept professional help, and it is really negatively impacting the family, especially if there's, kids involved. And I mean, mental health is a health problem. It's nobody's fault that they have these issues or that they're struggling with things. But also, you have, occasionally small people whose safety and health is your responsibility. And, and also for ourselves, not being stuck in a horribly unhappy situation.
Okay. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that is really important. It definitely doesn't have an easy answer. And before I get into that, I do want to circle back around to something that you had just said about how some things you might not share with your partner because they might more go into the kind of that fixing mentality. I mean, I agree wholeheartedly. I think that is something that happens a lot. And I think that sometimes it's just recognizing it's like, okay, well, there's going to be certain people in our life that know how to make us laugh. And there's certain people in our life who might be able to give really great advice. And sometimes you need that fixing. And sometimes you just need that person that will just listen. And sometimes you just need to hold that in yourself and not share it at all. And it's figuring out what you need, first of all, is a big part. And I do think that couples can work on that fixing piece. I know with my husband, because he is a fixer too, we've kind of come up with this thing where it's like, do you need me to listen to help, or do you need me just to listen and be there? And he's learned that for me, and this is going to sound really weird, but I like being told it's going to be okay. Like, even if it's not going to be okay, I just want him to tell me it's going to be okay and just give me a hug. And so he's learned that I don't always want advice on how to handle situations. So I think with partners, sometimes if we tell them what we need and they're willing to learn, sometimes they can give us a little bit more. And sometimes they can't. And sometimes we just have to go to other people because they give that in an easier way for them. So, but I'm really glad that you brought up the fixing thing. That really resonated with me. In terms of when someone has refusal to get professional help, I think it's a tricky one, and it can be really situation specific, first of all. But I think that if what the person is doing, if their behavior is causing harm, and I can't help but thinking about like drinking and how that can really come up that way, or maybe their emotions, their difficulty managing like anger can create a space where it doesn't feel safe for you, or for, like you said, for the little ones. I think the boundaries might have to be more intense. I think when that happens, that's when we might have to draw some physical boundaries and potentially have that person leave for a period of time, or have us have a space that you can take you and the kids away to be safe. So I think physical boundaries can be really important when there is something happening that doesn't feel safe. If things feel safe, but they're just hurtful or damaging in some ways, then you can start kind of putting verbal boundaries down. It's like, I understand you're really upset right now. We need to talk later because I can't hear what you're saying when you're this worked up. And then just, either taking the space or the kids with you from that person at that time, going into another room, or even just encouraging that person to kind of go do the thing that might help them calm down. When it comes to getting professional help, I think the one thing that doesn't work from my experience has been ultimatums. Like, a lot of times when we get really desperate and someone in our family is really struggling, sometimes we want to throw out an ultimatum there to say, if you don't do this, then this will happen, and kind of drawing that hard line. And then the person may not go, or they may go, but they may not actually try it. It won't make any difference. And so it's really important that when someone does get help, that they're motivated to do it. And so that's where I think ultimatums and boundaries are different. Is like, an ultimatum is forcing someone to get help, potentially before they're ready, where a boundary is saying, if you don't get help with this, then I have to, we need to take a break for a little bit, or we're going to have to take space when this happens, or the kids and I are going to go do this just because. And it's not saying you have to do this or this. It's saying this isn't safe for us. We have to make these choices until you're ready. So that way, when the person does go, it is their choice. But it is so hard, right? Like you could just, a lot of times when you're outside of the experience, you can look in and say, well, these behaviors are so harmful, this emotion so harmful. You know that there can be help available, whether it be medication or treatment or therapy. But it's hard because you're so helpless. Your hands are tied. We can't change another person. We can't control another person. We can just try to support them in it and protect ourselves and the ones that we love.
Yeah, I think too from, guests we've talked to, especially livestock farmers, there's all these other lives that are depending on you. And I feel like there's so many of us were raised with, these are the things where it's reasonable to leave. And they're all very extreme situations. And I think especially in small towns, like people know that other people are going to talk about why they broke up or, why one of them moved out or was this reasonable and, what horrible thing do we think was happening? Because probably it was just that they weren't happy, but we'll come up with something more dramatic because nobody just wants to hear that somebody wasn't happy. Like, nothing exciting to gossip about there, and there's just so much other pressure that, I feel like so many of us were raised with, if your partner hits you, then you leave. That's the boundary and not, but then you have kids and you realize that they're learning how to be people from what they're seeing you do.
Yes.
And that's a terrifying thing. I try not to think about too much because there's not enough therapy in the world for that one. Like, oh, they're learning how to treat their own partners and how to expect to be treated from what they're seeing us do.
Exactly.
And that's, having read some of Gottman's books myself, I really like that so much of their philosophy seems to be centered around respecting each other because there's definitely days that I don't even really like my husband. Sorry, dear. Not sure if I hope you're listening to this episode or not, but I try to make sure that we always respect each other and that that's what our kids are seeing because that is something that once you break it is pretty damn hard to get back.
I agree.
Okay, well, now that we've had my therapy session for the day, that's good. Yay.
No, I think that is so important. I'm reminded there's you may have heard of her too. Brené Brown talks about this thing called the marble jar, and in relationships, whenever someone does something that builds our trust or that we feel we're respected, it throws something in the marble. It throws a marble in the jar or several marbles in the jar. But every time someone does something hurtful or harmful, we start losing marbles. And sometimes what happens when relationships break down is there's just no marbles left. There's been just too many negative interactions or too many betrayals of trust on a variety of different levels or too much disrespect or lack of appreciation. And it just causes the relationship to totally break down. And I agree with you that I think sometimes people will stay together for the kids, but sometimes you have to break up for the kids to show them that this is what a healthy relationship looks like. And sometimes the healthiest relationships are the ones that aren't together. And so it's a tough one. It's a tough one. Like I said, that's why I always think relationships take a lot of work and you need to have both partners working on it.
Well, and I know too that with the respect thing, it turns out that some signs of respect I think are pretty universal, but a lot of them are very personality based, and how much work you have to put into communicating what you will find disrespectful and what you don't see as disrespectful. For example, in our house, one thing that is pretty common is we'll say, oh, this meal you made is horrible. I'll get rid of it. I will eat all of it so that you are not forced to eat this horrible thing. And my husband did that once when we had somebody over for supper. Just didn't think about it and was like, oh, this is disgusting. I will eat it so you don't have to. And the look on their face that my husband would sit at the table and say this to me, where it never even occurred to me that it would be taken as being disrespectful because I do the same
Yeah.
thing to him, and I'll be like, "Oh no, this pie we bought is terrible. You don't want any of this. I'll
Hmm.
just eat it so you don't have to." And
Yeah.
how much we have to really communicate around what our families taught us and what we see about these things,
Hmm.
because they are not universal. And I
Hmm.
mean, there's things that are, but there's a lot that is not. And making sure our kids know which of these things is not universal, because it does occur to me that I
Hmm.
don't want my kids to think that going to someone's house and insulting their cooking is a universally acceptable thing to do.
Yeah, that moment you're
Yeah.
embarrassed. You're like, no.
Great. Thanks, baby.
So while we're talking about family culture, another question that came in from a listener was about that extended families piece, right? I mean, so many of us are living very close or working with or maybe even living with extended families, people who are not part of our partnered relationship but are part of our lives. So what are some tips for how couples can approach the stresses that come in with other people, whether they be, I mean, I'm specifically talking about family, but I mean, family can also be just the close people in your life that put pressure on your relationship, that are not part of it, but end up playing a part.
Yeah, absolutely. So, just as we're talking about these different things, I'm finding a bunch of different ideas kind of merging together, and I wish that all the listeners could see me, because I would like to draw basically like a diagram where there's a whole bunch of concentric circles. At the center circle is just you, and then outside of that circle is you and your partner, and then outside of that circle can be maybe your kids, and then outside of that might be your parents, your in-laws, your other really important people in as part of your life. And then you might go a little bit further, and those might be kind of like, I call them mom friends, people that you're close to, but are just a little bit outside of the other people. It could be your accountant, but then you just kind of keep going in terms of closeness and vulnerability and connection. And then with your partner, I think it's really key to kind of recognize that the two of you do have this circle that's apart from everybody else. It's a special circle. And in fact, I call it the circle of trust. When I talk about it with my husband, I'm like, I'm going to tell you something, but don't go into the shop tomorrow and tell everybody in the shop what I just told you, because that will literally happen. I'll be like, this is in our circle of trust. And it's finding a way to kind of respect some boundaries, that some of the conversations that you might have, even if it's about the farm, or maybe it's something even more personal, that some things just aren't meant to be shared. And it's the same thing when you're given advice or have other people kind of creating expectations. It's making sure that the two of you come together and say, okay, well, this is what other people are expecting from us or wanting from us, or this is something someone had said to me. And it's having that like really open communication to kind of say, okay, well, when this thing was said to me, this is how it made me feel. And so it's just making sure that you have that safe place in your circle with just your partner. And then, as we were talking about before, you also have your own circle. So there's some things you're not even going to share with your partner and have boundaries around it. So I think the big part is that when you're working with family, or just working with other people that you're close to, is making sure that your partnership and maybe even just your immediate family has its own kind of separate space of things that are okay to talk about and not talk about outside of that, and just protecting it.
I know one thing that helped me a lot, Carrie, too, marrying into a family that was very different from my own, was picturing myself wearing like a little, a pith helmet and carrying a notebook and like being a little anthropologist and just trying to study these people instead of going, well, what the hell is wrong with these people? What the hell is wrong with me that I don't understand these people, because they all seem to think this is normal, and maybe it is normal and I'm the one who's screwed up. And, we've been married 10 years this spring, and it's getting a little better, I think. But, trying to really be aware of that it's not really that there's something wrong with you or them, that it turns out that you're different people. And I like the idea too of your circles starting with just you as a person in your own right, without your partner and your kids, and whatever else, that you are still a self, first and foremost.
Yeah.
And that's not a bad thing.
It's not.
So the other question I added here as a fellow introvert is, how do you, I'm trying to think of how to say this that doesn't sound horrible. What do you do on the days that you just don't give a shit about making your marriage healthy? Because there's some days that, the kids are sick, or the kids need something, and work needs something, and everybody else needs something, and then, you know that you should be a better partner, but fuck it, because, you can feed yourself and you're not on fire, so figure it out. And I know that's a totally fine thing occasionally, but it seems like it can be a real slippery slope. And getting back up that slope is really hard. So it would be nice to have some more tools for sort of stopping that slide before you hit the bottom of it.
Okay.
So fix all my life problems, please, Carrie.
Well, I first of all just want to because I'm going to connect this, I promise, but I really liked how you were described going into your husband's family with this hat of curiosity. I could picture the clipboard and everything. And I think when it comes to being in a relationship, being curious and being compassionate are amazing things. And I can hear that in the way that you're describing things. So I think in terms of the question that you asked around kind of the introverted, when you have nothing left, your batteries are drained, you're struggling. I always encourage people, and believe me, I struggle with practicing this myself, is you got to be curious and compassionate with yourself too. If you don't want to slip too far downwards, part of that is kind of being what's going on with me? Just pausing for a moment with all the demands coming around you and going to find a space. For me, honest to God, sometimes it's the car. I sit in the car a lot. I'll come home, and if there's nobody else with me, that is my quiet space where I just the bathroom is a safe space because it has a lock. Although everyone here knows how to defeat the lock, which is frustrating. But mostly is take space for yourself. Be curious about what's going on for you. Why do you not have anything left to give? Why are you just wanting to say screw it and not give anything else? And be compassionate towards yourself. Be geez, the kids are sick. I'm not feeling appreciated. I'm feeling exhausted. I haven't slept well for the last couple of nights. I've too peopled out. If you're an introvert, it's also recognizing maybe you've had too many people around you, and that's draining, right? Extroverts, a lot of people think extroverts are people who are outgoing. Extroverts are people who charge by being around other people. I have 2 children that are like that. I have no idea how I created them, but introverts need that time on their own and in order to recharge. And so if you have human beings around you, even your partner, it's too much. And so I think a big part is that if you're feeling that way, be curious, be compassionate towards yourself too, and take that space, because otherwise things will slip. If you just kind of try to keep giving and keep pushing, you're going to get to the point of extreme frustration, maybe even resentment for having demands made of you, and then just say screw it and shut down entirely. Where I think the way to prevent the slippery slope is to make sure you give yourself space. I say ideally every day. I know this sounds really crazy, but I give myself 5 minutes every day. And I know that's not a lot of time, but it makes a huge difference. I just take 5 minutes away from everything else to just be still and kind of be okay, what's going on with you? And so I think preventative work is really key. But if you notice yourself slipping that way and feeling resentful, it might be even telling your partner when you're in a good space, be sometimes I slip and I need your help to call me out on that and say, whoa, you're not in a good space, and then kind of help give me that time to reconnect with myself. Did that answer that?
Yes, it really did. I think too, when you talk about 5 minutes not being that much time, I find so often for myself, it's not, if I took a really long vacation and sat on the beach for a whole week, I would not find that relaxing. But sometimes that 10 minutes of just to heck with the lot of you, and, unless you're actually on fire, do not bother me for the next 10 minutes. And
Exactly.
Carving that space out for yourself can be so helpful, even if it's not, it's not about the amount of time or going and doing something. It's just about the giving yourself the permission to take whatever it is that you're taking.
Yes.
Which is why I'm going on vacation next week.
And it has to be.
So,
yes. And is it that you're visiting Arlene?
Yeah,
Did I hear that on?
So,
that's so wonderful.
There will be no beaches. Well, I mean, there could be, but the water will be frozen.
Oh, the fine beaches of Ontario in mid-February. Delightful.
Yeah, delightful.
It'd be cold and windy.
Very cold.
So, as a parent, it seems like, especially in those early days and months of becoming a new parent, and I'll say it especially for moms, you have a total life change that takes a long time to figure out for yourself, and that can impact your relationship in a lot of different ways. Do you have any thoughts on helping people through that transition time? Because that seems to be a really critical stage, it seems like, from when you're going from a couple to a family, and how I mean, you can still in theory think, yes, we're the center, I'm a person and my partner is the second circle, but when you have an infant in your house for the first time, they are so demanding and you don't feel like a self anymore. So do you have any thoughts on how people can kind of get through that period and keep their relationship intact? Because I feel like that's a critical point in a lot of relationships.
Yeah, I agree completely. And I think that with that, it's a big part is adjusting expectations. So when we think about that, we go through seasons in the year, like spring, fall, summer, or we think about seasons in farming, whether it be kind of calving season or lambing season or planting season. When we think about all these seasons, we also have seasons in our lives and our relationship. And I think when you are moving to parenthood, a big part is just recognizing things start to change, the boundaries start to change, the responsibilities change. And I think it's really important to just kind of flex on those expectations, recognizing you're probably not going to have as much time for each other. You're not going to, a lot of times, I always think that right after having a baby, my highest priority thing, if I have a moment, is to have a shower. And, it's like, no, I don't want to cuddle. I want to have a shower, and you're in survival mode. And I think that's what a lot of people don't realize is that initially you're in that survival mode, which means fight or flight, like your cortisol is going, you're exhausted. If women can have, and men can have this oxytocin, which is really good for bonding with the infant, but all of a sudden our priority shifts, right? And our focus might become prioritizing the baby. And that's a season of a marriage, right? When you first have a baby, your focus might be on the baby. Maybe that circle changes and the baby is kind of like the closest circle next to you, and then it's your partner. But it's still trying to find ways to be close and connected and being able to say, okay, this is just where we are right now. How can we still support one another? How can we still share responsibilities? And I find in farming, what's even harder about it is that there's no paid parental leave, right? And so you don't get that same beautiful opportunity where, and this is more of a traditional makeup here, where your partner can be there with you in the trenches for the first couple of weeks. And when you're not sleeping, and then, your partner can be at home letting you get a nap. That isn't possible, depending on, our babies have always been born in harvest. I don't know how that keeps happening, but that means that, he's there for me as much as he could be, but for the most part, I'm on my own. I'm really in survival mode. And so I think some of it is planning ahead, making sure other supports can be in place, other people can be there, being patient with one another, and just recognizing that that's a special season of your relationship. It's this incredible bonding time where you're bonding over being parents, but it's also kind of a time where you might feel the most disconnected because your priorities and your focus are shifting and changing. But again, I always go back to making sure that in that space, if you want to be able to be a good partner and if you want to be a good parent to your baby, you do still have to really carve out that 5-10 minutes for yourself or longer if you can. Take that shower, have that nap if there's someone willing to help you. But it is, I think a big part is just recognizing that things are going to change and that change will evolve. As the child gets older, you'll have more time for each other again. So it's just being flexible with those expectations, asking each other what you need, because that's going to be different, communicating what those things are, and just recognizing if in your family it's not possible for both of you to be in there in the trenches doing all the work together, it's finding other people in your life that can kind of help with that, so that you don't feel so isolated in that space, right? It's so hard, especially, I can say even for myself, my husband's like, oh, you're a harvest widow or something like that. And it can be really alone, really lonely and isolating, especially if you have a small human waking you up every 2 to 3 hours and needing you for everything.
Yeah. And so often it can feel like, speaking as a mother, that, my husband's life didn't change all that much, right? Like that he still walked out the door in the morning and assumed that everything was okay in the house. And for the most part, we managed, I coped, but yeah, there were lots of days where it's like, why has everything in my life changed? And
Yeah.
you seem to be able to just like walk around, like you can just like walk out the door. That just seemed, in those moments, it feels like that. Even just, walking out the door, having a shower without asking someone else for help to do that, right? Like you don't have to ask anyone to help you so you can go to the bathroom, or you don't have to take anyone with you. Like all of those basic needs all of a sudden feel impossible.
Agreed. Yeah.
Well, and Arlene too, I think, for so many of us who have married onto farms, that we've married into a business with a family that might live right across the road, and, maybe we're living in our husband's childhood home, and then we have a baby, and then he gets to just keep doing what he was doing. And now we can't even find a TV remote without, help. And it's, it can feel like a series of things where his life just got more interesting and cuddlier, and your life just got more poop. Literal and metaphorical poop.
And that can
it's just not
literal. Yes. Yeah. When that can build resentment, right? When you notice those things happening. And I think that's where there's a lot more conversation around the invisible labor of the primary caregiver, and recognizing all these small little things that you do day in and day out that really add up. And sometimes when the other person gets to leave the house without those significant changes, or even may come home and the house looks just as much of a disaster as when they left, but you've worked nonstop, at keeping all the poo together. So it can be, it can be really frustrating. And so I think sometimes it's just being like, this is what my day looked like. This is how hard it was. These are all the fires I put out, and they matter, right?
Yeah. Another thought I had before we move on to our wrap-up fun questions was, as a parent, sometimes it feels like there's extra pressure on your relationship because you're trying to model a relationship for your kids, which I know is important. And I know I've heard lots before about, fighting fair and letting kids see you resolve your arguments and all the, nice in theory things. But how do you both have a healthy relationship and model a healthy relationship without compromising your relationship? I guess it's kind of going in a circle, but do you know what I'm trying to say?
No, and I agree. And I think that's when I think we get inundated with too many messages of what the right thing to do is in a family or in a couple. Like, I think it's about figuring out what feels safe and okay in your family. And again, I think that's kind of comes back to Katie's conversation around like recognizing we each come in with different relationship experiences and family experiences, and that informs what being respectful or fighting fair or how we can be communicated with. Like, I'm really sensitive to yelling, so that doesn't work too well with me. I shut down immediately, where there's other families that yell at each other constantly. So it's about figuring out what works for you. And then it's also recognizing you don't need to be perfect. I think that's a huge part. Like, you don't have to have the perfect relationship. You don't have to always choose your words perfectly. It'd be nice if you can sometimes do that when you're fully charged and ready to be a healthy person. But the key, I think, for me, or at least what I try to use that helps me and my family is to be accountable for your words or your actions. And so if you've said something off the cuff that was hurtful, for me, I swear like a lot. It's a coping strategy. And so I have small people. When they were little, I used to say fudge instead of the other word. But now I've just recognized that these little humans can tolerate me saying swear words and not say them themselves inappropriately, which is great. And so it's about being kind of flexible. I mean, like, you don't have to be perfect, and it's being accountable, and it's making apologies. So if you've said or done something with one of the kids in your communication with them, or even your partner, to let them see you come back and be like, I messed up there. Like, I was really impatient. I took some frustration out on you that had nothing to do with you, or those were really hurtful words I used. I wish I would have said it this way instead. And so I think the big part is be compassionate. Don't feel like you need to be perfect in your communication all the time. You can't be that perfect role model. And if you mess up, I think the most healthiest thing you can model for your kids is accountability and apologies. Those, and like real apologies, not like sorry, which is how my kids say sorry to each other sometimes when I encourage them to do it, but like a real sorry, like, I messed up and I'm sorry for that. And this is how I would like to make it better.
Don't be perfect. Got it. I can
don't have to be perfect. We can't be perfect.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. It's just recovering from all those imperfections that can really be the healthiest things for kids to see.
Yeah. I've started trying to apologize to my kids, and it's hard. I mean, they're 6 and almost 5. And so part of me feels like, I'm a grown up. I shouldn't have to apologize to you because that's how I was raised. Mm-hmm. And it turns out that they are still people, even if they're short, and you still have to be nice. And that's how they learn to not be jerks to other people. So.
Exactly. Exactly. And I think you had said that in a previous episode I was listening to about, like, that's kind of like the goal of parenting is, like, try to make sure that they're not jerks. Which is a lot of work. I like
to say that my goal is that maybe they'll still have to go to therapy, but they should at least have to go to therapy for new stuff and not stuff that's like 5 generations old already. Because this generational trauma is just, we could be done with that.
It really is. Yeah.
So we ask all of our guests, if you were going to dominate a category at the county fair, what would it be? And categories can be real or made up to ensure that you win.
Okay. When I thought about this, I honestly wanted to come up with some really badass answer, but I'm terribly uncoordinated. But I am and I'm not a good cook at all, although everyone does eat my food and complain about it. But I am really crafty. So, and my kids often, in our area, they often enter the competitions for school for like coloring or creating things. So I think anything that involved paint, scissors, or glue, I think I could dominate that. I think I could work that competition at the county fair.
Sweet. Some kind of collage or something. I think there should be an adult.
Exactly.
I think there should be an adult collage category. I used to rock a collage, although there are a lot less magazines than there used to be.
It does make it harder, right? Finding that print material. You end up having to like print it off of your computer.
That's right. That's a lot more steps. Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you have any other thoughts before we move into our cussing and discussing segment? You covered a lot of territory today. I just thought I would, in case you had anything else that came across your mind before we move on completely, or do you think we're good for now?
I would say that the main message, if I could get it out to everyone in terms of the things that I feel really stand out, is just recognizing that the small things make a big difference, and make a repair. Apologize when you mess up. Like, I think if you can do those things to kind of show appreciation to your partner, to connect on a physical way, or to connect on an emotional level, like all those small things. It can be even just a simple thing like, I might have saw something really cool on my phone and I wanted to show my partner that, if he didn't look up from his phone and just kind of kept doing his own thing, that has an impact. Like, you don't feel connected, you don't feel valued. But just taking a moment to look up and take a look over and be like, oh yeah, that's a really funny video, and just paying attention. The Gottmans call it turning towards, like just turning towards and paying attention and showing value for what your partner does. Those small little things, those small acts really, really, really add up for a healthy relationship.
It's good to know that the memes that my husband and I are sending each other are actually a good connecting tool. I hadn't thought of it that way before,
therapeutic. It totally is.
There's between the yes, no, and can you get this thing text. There are a lot of strange memes going back and forth. So that's part of connecting as a couple. So we'll go ahead and move into our cussing and discussing segment, and listeners can leave their cussing and discussing entries with us, and you can check the show notes for our SpeakPipe or our email to leave those for us. Katie, what are you cussing and discussing this week?
TV remotes. They're bullshit.
Did you lose one?
No, we have like 3 of them. We have 3 of them because they keep getting lost. Yeah. But the battery doors fall off. The buttons don't work right. All of them have 5 times as many buttons as they can possibly actually need because, they have their universal remotes because God knows what happened to the remote that came with the TV. But now we've got buttons for every possible thing under the sun, and we only just have the TV. We don't have surround sound or a Blu-ray player or whatever else we have buttons for. And they're always sticky because we have little kids. And I just 2 thumbs down. We have people living in outer space. We should be able to have TV remotes that are not gross. That's that.
Affirmative.
And that aren't so complicated too, right? But the kids never seem overwhelmed by it. They always know what buttons to press. But,
you're sitting there in the dark and you can't tell what button you're hitting because you have to hit the button for the remote to light up so you can see what button it is. And then you get old, you got your bifocals and you're moving the remote back and forth so you can see what it says. And it's sticky. Mm-hmm. Or it's down in the couch and you have to stick your hand down in there and God knows what else you're going to touch.
I added tiles, like those little pager thingies to our remotes because I was tired of losing them and not being able to figure out where they were. So that's my hot tip for this week is stick a tile on your remote for when it gets stuck in the couch cushions and then you don't have to check all them. Because I could walk into the room and ask the people who used the remote previously where it is and none of them will have any idea.
Well,
but then I hit the button and it's exactly where they were sitting.
The worst too is we're just now getting out of the phase where we had to hide the remote to stop them from changing the channel on each other when they'd fight. And so we'd hide the remote and then we'd never be able to find the damn thing again. It would be like, well, it's, on top of the china cabinet. I don't know where it is because you got to put it somewhere they can't see it.
That was the hiding place today.
Yeah. All right. So Carrie, what do you have to cuss and discuss?
Well, I do have a quick question. Arlene, how do you get the tile thing to stick to the remote control? Because we're always losing it. I think it's the main source of conflict in our house.
There are some that are our little round stickers. They actually have 2-sided tape on them, and those are the kind I bought. Now, when the sticky stuff wears off, then I just used packing tape and stuck it back on again. But there are little round button style tiles that have 2-sided tape, and you can stick them to whatever you want.
Thank you so much. That I'm actually going to be implementing because we can never find the remote control ever. Yeah. And it usually is in the couch cushions mixed in with goldfish crackers. But
all
so
the
that's
crumbs.
Awesome.
They should look into using that as a building material, that cement that forms between the couch arms or whatever.
Oh,
ugh.
So gross.
With all the pet fur.
So Carrie, what were you actually going to? Now I just interrupted you again.
Yeah, No, it totally came up to me today. At first, I was going to talk about apologies because we had it come up on the weekend where 2 kids were fighting and they were just "Ugh, sorry," and just didn't get that. But then I was really agitated when I got coffee this morning as a little treat for me. And as I was in the drive-thru, and anyone in my area might actually know about the sign that I'm talking about, but you know how in the drive-thru of Tim Hortons often has a whole bunch of signs advertising businesses, it's a prime location, obviously, when you're sitting in the drive-thru. And one of those things there, what really bothers me, it's 2 real estate professionals, and it says, "Buy a bigger house. It's cheaper than divorce." That's the message. And it really, really bothers me, not just because it's superficial, but it really bothers me because I think it's playing on people's vulnerabilities and their insecurities. And it's also giving the opposite of the message that we've been talking about today, where you have to do these really big things in order to keep your relationship healthy. It's your partner's not happy, then you need to buy them a bigger house, or you should, buy them a new piece of jewelry, or in my case, buy my husband a new Massey tractor. It's
right. Throw money at it. That'll fix it.
Throw money at it. That'll fix it. Yeah, that'll solve it. It bothers me. I'm it's playing on vulnerabilities. It's also the wrong message. It's not true at all. sometimes buying that bigger house will be the thing that causes the relationship to break down further because of the financial strain.
Mm-hmm.
So that was my agitating piece today, is that unhealthy message.
Yeah, I imagine that as a couples therapist, that would definitely be not the message you want to see.
You need to just put your ad out there that says, couples therapy, cheaper than divorce or a bigger house. Like,
exactly.
Yeah, put yours right beside it.
Put a sticker on it.
I honestly thought about that. I was like, could I?
You should.
Yeah, you'll see the National Farmer Mental Health Alliance now.
Yeah.
They're probably supporting this healthier message.
Arlene, what do you have to...
People would notice it.
Yeah. What do you have to custom discuss?
We had a conversation earlier this week. We've had a pretty busy week with interviews, and we had a conversation earlier this week where we talked about not having or trying to reduce the amount of guilt that we have. And then not very long after, I got a call from the principal for one of the kids. They did a thing. It doesn't really matter what it is. But my immediate response in my head was feeling guilty myself for what my kid had done. And I don't know how I'm sure that probably lots of people feel the same way. So that's why I'm saying it. But it's just like such a weird brain thing to be like, I didn't do that. Yes, the person that lives in my house and who happens to be my child did that thing, but I did not do that thing. So why do I feel so bad about it? I mean, yes, there were going to be consequences and we were going to discuss it and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, my brain jumped immediately to, oh, I feel so bad. What am I going to do to make this better? And it was like, that's not my job. But yeah, it was just interesting that we'd also had that conversation. So yeah, that's where my head went. But at least I also had it in my head to be like, stop, this is not your thing.
It's not. And yet sometimes we feel like it is. Like we can feel really judged for the actions of our children or any one of our family members, as if we shaped them into that human. And although you might have an influence on it, you can't control it. So yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So that was my thing this week. So I'm still going to say,
just remember, just be like, I'm a good mom.
Banish the guilt.
That's right. Get rid of that guilt.
And extended family bonuses. One of his consequences was that he had to go and shovel grandma's front steps. So it all worked out. She got chores done. Aww. And he got some consequences for some things that went on. So we want to thank you so much, Carrie, for joining us today. If people want to connect with you, where should they find you online? What's the link?
In terms of my private practice, if someone wanted to work with me, they could find me at flourishwithcompassion.com, or they could follow me on my Instagram account, which I just love. It's such a fun, creative place for me, at compassionate_counselor. Or you can find me through the National Farmer Mental Health Alliance, which is nfmha.ca. Or you can follow us online at NFMHA Alliance, which is unfortunate that we couldn't find something simpler there. So you can find us either probably on our website or online.
Definitely. And we will include all that in the show notes too. Thank you. It was great to talk to you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for talking to us.
And happy Valentine's Day to all of our listeners.
Thank you for joining us today on Barnyard Language. If you enjoy the show, we encourage you to support us by becoming a patron. Go to www.patreon.com/Barnyard Language to make a small monthly donation to help cover the costs of making the show.
Please rate and review the podcast and follow the show so you never miss an episode.
You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok as Barnyard Language, and on Twitter, we are Barnyard Pod. If you'd like to connect with other farming families, you can join our private Barnyard Language Facebook group.
We're always in search of future guests for the podcast. If you or someone you know would like to chat with us, get in touch. We are a proud member of the Positively Farming Media Podcast Network.